Hindi-Rusi Bhai Bhai, Indians and Russians are brothers. This slogan was proclaimed by the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev at a rally in Bangalore. It became a symbol of relations between the two countries. India was perhaps the closest friend of the Soviet regime among non-socialist states, especially after both countries have quarreled with China. At the same time, archival KGB documents tell us that the relations between the USSR and India were not always idyllic as portrayed on the posters. Today I will tell you about one interesting report dated 1967. The KGB of the Ukrainian SSR informed the party leaders that the attitude toward the Soviet people in India had worsened recently. Specialists from the USSR, mostly engineers working in India, became the main source of such observations. My name is Pavlo, and you are watching KGB Files. The document begins with a description of a bloody incident that happened to a Soviet scientist. On July 21, 1967, the KGB received information about an attack on the Soviet professor Chelyshev, who was working at an institute of the city of Jamshedpur. A group of local residents entered his apartment and beat him and his wife with sticks and stones. The whole room was covered with blood. The case was being investigated by the Indian police, who were trying to accuse the perpetrators of assault and robbery. A known person stole a girl from one of the Soviet settlements. Local residents believed that she was kidnapped for ransom. Soviet citizens were surveilled and attempted to compromise while buying various goods. During their absence, their wardrobes and suitcases were opened and personal belongings were examined. Anti-Soviet and tendentious literature was disseminated among Soviet specialists. Some Soviet specialists and members of their families faced an unfriendly attitude from Indian senior employees. According to the document, on the Ranchi heavy engineering plant, the head of a department, while talking with Soviet specialists, didn't pay his respects to the USSR and at the same time admired the Western states. Indian authorities were trying to keep their citizens away from communicating with Soviet specialists. In the city of Dugarpur, Indian specialists were invited to watch Soviet movies in a Soviet club. But local authorities stated that since these films are not censored, they are forbidden to be shown to the public. One of the invited Indian engineers refused to come and explained that otherwise he would have to give explanation to the police. By the way, Bollywood films were super popular in the USSR. 4 out of 10 top foreign movies in the Soviet Union were from India, more than from any other country. Let's go back to the document. Also, a number of Indian specialists worked in the USSR. The first group of them, who came back to India in 1965, quickly took up with Soviet specialists. But those who followed them and returned from the Soviet Union in the second half of 1966 and in 1967 were avoiding Soviet specialists and talked to them with restraint. At that time, the USSR helped to build many objects in India. The KGB document mentions cases suspected of sabotage and deliberate destruction of equipment at these construction sites. On the construction of the Bhilai Iron and Steel Works, someone put a bottle of gasoline covered with tow soaked in gasoline. Bus bars were disconnected, and after they were shorted, the tow were supposed to ignite. Thus, an explosion would occur. Soviet specialists working in the city of Patratu in Bihar state complained that local employees disabled machines supplied by the USSR to compromise Soviet equipment. Indian authorities stated that they need to reduce the number of Soviet specialists to save money, though the KGB believed that such changes happened because the Indian government wanted more economical independence for their country. A Soviet specialist working in Kota was disgruntled with Indian press, which didn't publish enough materials about the contribution of the Soviet Union to the Indian economy. Indian engineers didn't know a lot about how the USSR had helped to discover oil and to build enterprises in India. The USSR was deeply concerned because the capitalist way of life was actively advertised in India. English and American movies were shown. Bookshops and street stalls were filled with cheap American and German publications, including Dr. Zhivago, Mein Kampf, Memoirs of Hitler's Generals, and so on. It's the funniest part of the document. Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago, awarded the Nobel Prize but banned in the USSR, is put on a par with the Hitler's book. And the Soviet document states that ordinary factory workers had a positive attitude towards Soviet specialists and appreciated their technical assistance. According to the resolution on the document, this information was sent to the Central Committee of the CPSU. It means to Moscow. The trends described in this document were not strong enough to change the nature of relations between the two countries. On the contrary, Indira Gandhi, who became the Prime Minister in 1966, chose a course for even closer rapprochement with the USSR, especially after the Soviet support for India in its war with Pakistan in 1971. But these KGB documents are interesting because they describe processes which remain in the shadow of global events known to all. That's all. Don't forget to support us on Patreon. The link is below, and thanks to all our patrons who helped us to release this episode. We have more archival documents for future videos related to India, so if you don't want to miss them, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell button.